And then
Don't
here
go live
we are,
yet.
just
No.
in the middle of talking,
no.
and oh, here we go.
Crap.
All right, hello everybody, and welcome to our week 1 live event for the 60-day novel challenge. I am joined with my host Hank Garner and our special guest host Josh Hayes, who is frozen in time, it seems. But we thank you for joining us.
Yeah, the eyes slowly blink. They're like, I know that you're not frozen, Josh.
Before we dive into it, for those who haven't done a live event like this before, behind on our side of it, it is like the most uncomfortable thing waiting for it to start and waiting for it to end. So we always have a good laugh about it. But we are here for the 60-day novel challenge. We are so excited. We have, I think, about 200 people that join the Storycraft Cafe challenge community for it, and I know we have more people than that have downloaded the template and will be following along. So we are very excited. And if you're joining us live today, thank you for joining us. If you're watching this after the fact because you couldn't make it live, thank you for watching and catching up. We are going to kind of feel out the structure of these live streams. We have some things that we want to chat about. We're going to talk about our own experiences and how we're approaching this challenge. We're going to talk about the exercises that are in the template. We're going to go over the homework that we've done and that you will have before the next live stream if you're keeping up with us on a weekly basis. And then we'll just chat at the end, a little Q&A session, I think is what we'll do. And try not to get too derailed along the way because we like to talk and we like to talk about a lot of stuff. So
first of all, you didn't tell me anything about any homework. So kind of
the homework was all about precious metals and the pronunciation of North Korean names.
North Korean.
That was from before the show started, everyone.
Yeah.
We have Steph from Central New York State. Hello, Steph. Lovely to see you again. If you are hanging out in the chat, feel free to say hello, where you're from, what you're working on. If you've looked at the template yet, if you have any thoughts or if you've done any of the work, feel free to let us know about that. But I think we'll just get started. So
yeah,
why don't we start with a little introduction ourselves?
Hello, is it Jacqueline from the Mississippi Gulf Coast? Good to have you here. I'm about 2 hours north of you.
And we have Ilsa from the Netherlands. Always lovely to see Ilsa.
Michael from London.
Awesome. Hello. All right.
Isn't it like the middle of the night over there?
What, 9 o'clock maybe?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Aren't they 6 hours? Is it 7 p.m. ish there?
Maybe 5 hours. Yeah.
In my math,
Ignis from Finland, Raven from Texas, Fiona from the UK, Morgan from Morocco. Love seeing all these names here. All right. Well, since I'm already chatting away, I'll start with the introduction for myself. My name's Doug. If you've been to live events before, you've probably seen myself or Hank hosting them. I've been writing for Dabble for, I don't know, 3 years, something like that. And now I do a lot of events. I run the premium community content for Dabble. And on the author side of things, I've written or co-authored 5 novels, 3 of them #1 new releases, 1 a #1 bestseller. Both are 2 different series, 1 in dark fantasy, 1 in urban fantasy. And then on top of that, I edit. I watch horror movies. I play D&D. I go for hikes. That's me. That's Doug in a nutshell, and I will be here the whole 60 days for this challenge.
He really likes pina coladas and getting caught in the rain.
I love coconut, but I don't actually like pina coladas. I do love strawberry daiquiris. Oh.
You give me a coconut cream pie, I am all over it. All over it.
One of you gentlemen, take it away, please.
I'll jump in. I'm Hank Garner. I am the host of the Storycraft Cafe podcast. Before joining Dabble, I hosted a podcast called Author Stories, where we did over 1,500 author interviews over about 8 years. For the last couple of years, we have been doing the Storycraft Cafe podcast. We're almost up to about 200 episodes of author interviews and deep dives on particular elements of craft. And we're having a blast doing that. Plus, other content that we create. We've done video courses and are in the process of a bunch of that stuff and running some of the community side as well. As an author, I've published about 8 novels under my name, co-authored about 20 under a pen name, and several collections of short stories. And I have a couple of short stories that live on the moon right now. And
which is cool.
Currently have finished a sci-fi trilogy that is with a publisher now, and now getting started on a new mystery series that kind of in the vein of old school Agatha Christie or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sort of now the term for that would be cozy mystery, but without some of the cutesy punny stuff, but more of an old school whodunit. So that's me.
Can we just take like a second to revisit that moon comment? Because I don't think people truly understand that, and you don't talk about it enough.
Yeah, there have been some what would be the term, when you bury a thing, a time capsule. There have been a couple of freight deliveries to the moon, and Samuel Peralta and a couple of other publishers have negotiated to include a bunch of their published works in there. And I had a number of short stories published in some anthologies that were included in that. And I think I have 3 short stories that live on the moon right now.
Nice.
So cool.
Yeah.
Like there's like a handful of people that can say that.
Yeah. It doesn't mean a whole lot, but it sure is fun to say,
Yeah.
And least and last, I am Josh Hayes. I am a science fiction, fantasy, and thriller author. I just had to count. I have 13 novels published. 14 is anywhere from between 70 and 75% finished, depending on who you talk to. And 15 is about halfway finished. I've got, I don't know, over a dozen short stories published, various anthologies, collections, most of which are still available. I am working on finishing a science fiction thriller. It's basically Mission Impossible in space, but I'm going to be working on a modern day military / spy thriller, kind of in the vein of The Gray Man or Matt Drake from Don Bentley. So that's me. And I work for Athon Books. I do thriller acquisitions occasionally, and I do operations for Athon.
Awesome. I want to point out, I mean, we have a lot of comments here, a lot of people saying hello, which I really appreciate, and I love seeing everyone from everywhere. But a couple that I want to highlight is Kara saying here that she's appreciative of the new approach with the 60-day challenge template to help her avoid burnout in the future. I really appreciate comments like that, and I'm glad that it can help you like that. And then Ray here saying, happy y'all are so willing to help out the little leaguers. That's awesome. I've truly never thought, and I mean, I have the least amount of books of everyone on this panel, but I've never thought to myself that somebody writing their first book is somehow like little league compared to me. And I know that, yesterday we had the little motivational event where people had 70 books. I think.
Scott Moon and Kevin Tumlinson each have over 70 books published, and then Steve Bowyer popped in with a meager 40. And
right,
Steve has published several hundred under his watch with Athon as co-owner, but only 40 that he's written. And then I'm over here with, I don't know, a total of 30 something. But
to be fair, Rhett does mostly good writing in the books that they write together.
I will say we called this out on the show yesterday that Josh, you and I have had so many conversations, but you always alluded to Scott Moon being this figure that when you joined the police force, that he was someone you looked up to because Scott was always writing, and he was a full-time police officer high up in the ranks, if I remember right. But you were always like, I want to be like Scott. And then, we finally got to have Scott on and said, well, this is who Josh is always, pointing to that he wanted
Scott's
to
a
be
good
like.
dude.
Yeah, he's a great dude.
I'm gonna have to text him and give him crap for not telling me he was gonna come on the show. I would have hopped on and ragged him a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. He needs it. He needs it, honestly.
But anyway,
as far as the little leaguers comment though, the little leaguers that if you want to call it that, like you said, first time authors, that's the hardest part about doing it. I mean, after so many novels and finishing so many stories, it's not easy by any means, but it's a lot easier than the first one. The first one's always the hardest. So the authors out there that are working on your first or even your second book, your job is dramatically harder than the work that I do every day. Just because that first one is such a hard thing to finish. Just to type the end on that it's very tough. So anybody that's ever writing their first or second or third novel, that's a dramatic thing, and it's a very important thing. And don't ever consider yourself a little league, because that's the toughest one.
Yeah, it is the toughest one. I want to tag onto what you just said, Josh, because it is arguably the most important time of your career, because you're building those habits. You're proving to yourself that you can get through it, that you can go from point A to point Z. But something we talk about on the podcast a lot is the gift of anonymity, because at this point in your career, nobody knows to expect anything from you. When you have 10 books out, and then you've got books on pre-order, and you've got people that have followed along and they love your work and they want to buy your next book, all of a sudden that's a level of pressure on you as an author that you never have to deal with in the beginning, because nobody knows to expect anything. And yes, 100%. It can be frustrating because you want to get that book out, you want to start your career, you want to get people plugged in, excited, addicted to your work, but you'll never get this point back where it's just you and the story, and you're getting to pour all of your love into it, and you'll never get this time back. I cannot say that enough, is that this is yes, it's crucial, it's important, it's hard, but it's also a gift. So look at it that way.
The cool thing about it also is you cannot disappoint readers you don't have.
Exactly.
And so your first novel, technically speaking, isn't going to disappoint anyone, right? But you run into that, as you get further on, you can put out a book and just completely let down your readers, or make them angry or whatever. That's my running George R.R. Martin theory with The Winds of Winter. Is everybody's got these different theories of why he's not writing and why he's not finishing, and
you mean the book that'll never be finished?
The book that'll never be finished. Yeah. My biggest theory with that is that he's absolutely terrified of not being able to wrap it up the way it should be, or the way that people think it's going to be, and I think that he's terrified of letting everybody down, just because, well, I mean, the show was a failure, but the ending of his series, it's been built up for so many years. I can't imagine the pressure he's facing to wrap it up in a way that most people will enjoy or like.
Yeah. Another word for that is Pat Rothfuss syndrome.
Yeah.
Anyway,
speaking of pressure, we're all choosing to take on pressure ourselves by writing a novel in 60 days, which is, I commend everyone for being here. And even if it is your first novel, the mix of both the liberation of not having that external pressure, but then trying to, achieve something monumental, it is something that isn't easy. So, kudos to everyone for joining us on this challenge. For week 1, we are starting from the very beginning. We're looking at the big picture. And I've been, going through the community on the Storycraft Cafe for this challenge and looking at the posts that people are making. And we have such a mix of people who know exactly what they want to write, who have already started writing and just want to use this to get 50,000 or more words in, or who have no idea whatsoever what they want to write. They just know they want to write a book in 60 days, right? So this week, we are going to be focusing on more that last category, the people who don't really know what they want to write, or if you have like an inkling of an idea and you want to turn it into a book, we're going to focus on those people. And the way that we've done that in the template, at least, and the way that I kind of want to start off this discussion is understanding your genre. And I know when I wrote my first book, it was very kind of off the cuff. I was still in school. I said, okay, I really like reading. I'm going to try my hand at writing. It took me, 5 years to finish it. And then I put it out there. And I've learned so much since then. And one of the things that I wish I had known was understanding my genre better. And I know amongst you two, like, I'm writing the same genre for this challenge that I always write. But Hank, you're writing in a more or less new genre with cozy mystery. Josh, you mentioned that you were moving away from sci-fi to write espionage, like political thriller. So how do you two kind of go about understanding this new genre that you want to write in?
Well, I'll start by saying mysteries, whodunits, now popularly cozy mystery, is something that I've loved all of my life. I used to watch movies and TV shows with my mom, especially, and she always had these murder mysteries on TV or movies or something. It was something that I enjoyed with her, and I've always loved to read them. I love old Agatha Christie puzzle books where you're trying to stay one step ahead of the narrator in the book and trying to solve the puzzle. So it's something that I've always loved, but it's not something I've been passionate about per se. There's been other things that have gotten my attention, but it's something I was familiar with. So about I don't know, a year ago, I really started talking to some authors that are in the space, whom I respect, and just kind of feeling out where the market was today, what is selling, what are reader expectations, what are some common tropes that are used, and really kind of immersing myself in that world. And I started finding that that it's a wide enough category that you can find a niche where you can fit in and still kind of fall under that umbrella. So it's really some legwork that I've been doing for a while, and finding a place where I feel like that I could plug in and not and this is gonna sound worse than I mean it, but not compromise to fit into a place just to hit a market or something. Like, I could tell the story I want to tell with the elements that I want, and I think it'll fit in fine there without having to put in elements that I wouldn't normally write or something, but I could get close enough that I think I could fit there. So it's just doing a lot of market research, reading books that are in there, talking with people who have been successful, and just kind of immersing myself in that culture, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Josh?
Well, for me, in terms of story, a lot of times the genre can affect the type of story that you're telling, but a lot of times the story, the setting of the story doesn't matter a whole lot of time, unless that setting directly affects your story. Like in some fantasy where a world's magic system is different, that could affect the story. But the core story, a lot of times doesn't. The setting and the scenery and all the window dressing doesn't matter. The story can be the same regardless of where you put it. And so for me, moving away from sci-fi and getting into kind of a modern day setting doesn't necessarily change the story. It just changes how I present it. And obviously, if setting it in the real world and in modern day setting, it forces me to ground a lot of the elements in reality. Whereas in sci-fi, I can just make the stuff up and it doesn't matter. Um, and in sci-fi, you can get things wrong in terms of like fundamental storytelling, but as far as the core story goes, the elements of that, you can't really be wrong because you're making it all up. And one of my favorite like criticisms of story, or especially in sci-fi, is like, that's, you can't do that, you can't go faster than light, or you can't have a laser sword or something like that. And it's not realistic. I'm like, it's sci-fi. Like everything about it is unrealistic. But in terms of a modern day real world setting, there's a lot of things that you can and can't do based on actual technology, and so that changes how I present the story and how I research the story. Um, that happened to me today while I was writing down ideas for the book. I went down a rabbit hole of trying to find out which specific U.S. corporations dealt with rare earth minerals in South America, and like going through like different tabs of just research on that. But as far as the thriller aspect, I do a lot of that in my writing anyway. Just the kind of the core tropes of thriller, and I've read um, modern day either military or political fiction or spy fiction for years and years and years. I mean, I grew up on Tom Clancy. I read a lot of I've read almost everything that Mark Greaney has written. I've read almost everything that Don Bentley has written. Vince Flynn, all those guys that are massive in that genre. And that's the market that I want to hit. And it doesn't require a lot of impromptu research because I've been just doing it for years natively while I'm reading these books. And so I kind of have a good grasp on the kind of elements that I need to have in the story and which ones I can kind of let slide a little bit.
Well, and you could argue that your book Edge of Valor is a political thriller.
For sure.
Yeah,
it's just
some sci-fi window dressing, but to 100%. Me it is what's the movie with Tom Cruise and you can't handle the truth,
Few Good Men.
A Few Good Men. You could argue that Edge of Valor is more A Few Good Men than it is Starship Troopers, but
I actually based the idea for that book on Black Hawk Down and Courage Under Fire, two modern day military kind of mystery whodunit thrillers, and just set it in a sci-fi setting. The story was basically the same. The elements were similar, but putting it in a sci-fi series just kind of changed how it looked and how it felt and all of that. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
I have something else I want to ask, but I just want to say thanks for joining us, Jacqueline, because they have to pop off. Currently working on psychological thriller and a cozy horror. I love the idea of cozy horror.
Nice.
Now, for our participants, I kind of want to wrap this around, and I'll state what I think first, and I'll turn it out to you two. I think if you're writing your first book, you don't necessarily need to think too hard about genre, right? If you're going into double-digit books, if you're making a substantial income or a sizable income from your books, then you're thinking genre, right? You're thinking, what do people want to read, and kind of playing around with that. But if it's your first one, I propose that people think about genre to the extent that it gives them kind of the border of their sandbox to play in, but also kind of things that they didn't think about that they can kind of lean into. So, for example, I'm writing dark fantasy, which is subgenre of fantasy, obviously, that can get very gruesome, very grotesque, very violent, pulls horror elements in it. And so I know that I can lean really far into those mature themes where another genre, a subgenre of fantasy, that wouldn't be okay. People wouldn't like that, right? And I'd lose that. But I can now pull elements from the horror genre to buff up my story. Do you two agree that first-time authors need to think kind of about genre, more about genre, less about genre?
On a very basic level, yes. Like you said, an example would be if you're writing a comedy, you don't want graphic horror violence in it, right? Like that, unless it's a graphic horror violent comedy, right? But on a basic level, if you're writing a mystery, you want mystery. If you're writing, an adventure, you want adventure. But you also need to look at the things that you don't want to include in your book that may turn off the readers that are looking specifically for one thing. You can have a genre book that kind of edges on subgenres, but you definitely want to make sure that if you're writing a specific genre, that you don't cross over and bring elements of different genres that aren't necessarily like wholly viewed as part of that genre if you're trying to capture that audience. Now, you can always write the book you want to write and put everything you want in it. But if you're looking to capture a specific market, then you need to make sure that you're not overstepping your bounds, but kind of not conflating different things. Because, you know, if you want to write a Western, write a Western. If you want to write a sci-fi, write a sci-fi. But if you want to write a sci-fi Western, just know that that market is very small. And so, and the crossover doesn't connect either.
Yeah, I agree with everything both of you said. I think your end goal determines how you should think about it. We interviewed Penn Cole a couple of days ago, a romantasy author who's blowing up right now, and she had the time and the forethought to think about her series before writing it. And she went in with very specific goals, not only of the story she wanted to tell, but how she wanted to write it and how she wanted to publish it. And knowing all of that, she did market research ahead of time, and she had very specific reader goals she was shooting for. Very specific, she went in knowing a lot of things that most authors don't know until after most authors approach a book, they write the book they want, and then figure out what to do with it. If you've got enough of a thought about what you're wanting to write and who you want to read it, take those things into account ahead of time. Some people don't know that. Some people don't know what subgenre they want to hit until they start writing it, and it kind of let the characters determine where it goes. So I would say, in that case, think about the meta genre delineations. Don't think so much about subgenre and figure it out as you go. If you have the forethought and you know what you're wanting to hit and who those readers are, get very specific. But if it's your first book and you just don't know yet, you don't know enough, write it and see how it feels to you. And if that fantasy becomes more dark fantasy, then lean into that, especially in your editing phase. When you go to that second draft, that's the time where you can really hone in. When you kind of figured out what your book is and where it's going, then you can start honing that, trimming out the things that might offend a certain audience or might not attract a certain audience or whatever it is. That's where those second, third drafts really start to shine.
For sure.
When I started writing my first book, I didn't actually know dark fantasy was a subgenre. And so I'm like, oh, this is fantasy. And then I'm like, oh, this is kind of gross though. This is like one scene's scary. And then I learned dark fantasy is a thing. Okay, let's go back and, add a few things here. So what I have done as well for the people who are following along with the template, I've put a couple slides together showing my answers or some of the answers to the exercises included. So I'm just going to pop up mine for the genre real quick before we move on. So what genre am I writing in? I'm writing fantasy, and some core characteristics or reader expectations I pulled from that is magic with a defined, understandable system, a hard magic system versus a soft magic system, which you could have as well. Monsters and supernatural characters, mine are angels and demons. And then epic fight scenes, I put an asterisk beside because some people, some of my friends even, read fantasy, but they don't actually like fight scenes. And I tolerate them as friends at best because I think I think fight scenes are great in books, in shows, in whatever. So, I am targeting a more particular audience with that, but understand that's not core for everyone. And then I dove a little deeper with dark fantasy, pulling on the expectations or characteristics that morality is relative. It's mostly bleak with sprinklings of hope that I usually tear away after, and then I sprinkle in those horror elements as well.
Yes.
It's not going to be a happy book.
You can't have it.
And then the last exercise in the genre part of the template was thinking about your target audience. And again, I don't think new authors necessarily need to do this. If you can, great, but you probably won't even know until like after your book's out there, to be honest. But I've learned, my fans are the same fans as the Game of Thrones or The Witcher, right? Just dark fantasy, graphic, multiple storylines and perspectives. Ages 25 to 60 is a huge range. I'd like to whittle that down, but I can't get data to support anything smaller than that. Okay with violence, gore, swearing, and other mature elements, because I've gotten some reviews on my work where people were not okay with those things. I don't know how they found my books, but they pointed out they weren't happy with that. And not evangelically religious.
The crazy thing about swearing is that I've got I've got a couple of books where people kind of talk about that, and I don't swear a lot. I mean, I do in my books, and in real life, I swear way a lot. Like, no, Hank, I'm talking about in my books, not in real life. I'm a freaking pirate in real life, but I've gotten reviews on some of my books where they're talking about the swearing or whatnot, and how they didn't like it, or there could have been less. And then I think about some of the the most popular books that are out there that you can. The one that comes to mind is The Martian by
Andy Weir.
Andy Weir. And his first sentence, like you read his first sentence, and all of those people would probably have shut the book, but it's like one of the best-selling science fiction books of all time. And even a lot of other books have swearing all over the place from in a traditional sense, and it's just funny to me how a lot of people can kind of latch onto that, but in the majority,
it's also how the swearing is used. Andy Weir in The Martian, yes, he swears a lot, but and I'm thinking back, and I'm sure somebody will point out a place where I'm wrong, but it's, shall we say, rarely done maliciously toward another person. It's it's like, he's talking to himself. It's frustration. It's
got more comedy weight than it does
exactly
malicious weight. Yeah,
and it's never you so and so. It's never directed at someone else. It's a lot of internal, a lot of self-deprecating swearing humor. Which goes over a whole lot better for most
that
everyone, than just kind of in your face.
Right.
You'll also find a lot for the folks watching, you'll think about the language you're using based on the genre you're writing as well. So if you're writing like young adult fiction, less swearing. It doesn't mean that there's none, but it means maybe you're not dropping the more extreme cuss words in there. My last one here, not evangelically religious either, and that I have a lot of religious people who read my books, and it has angels and demons in it. So this comes from the first time I tried Facebook ads. Before I knew anything about Facebook ads, I just put angels as a keyword, and I got put into a lot of people who were very religious, and so they shared it, calling it a load of BS. And very, very unhappy with my ads. So they say all publicity is good publicity, but I don't think that was very good publicity
right
in their circles. So I learned that day.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna pull that off so we can see our handsome mugs again. Blackblade saying in the comments that showing that's very helpful to see how others use the tools. Fantastic. I'm glad that was the goal. And Ray asked us a question, but I saved it till the end, Ray, so that we can have it in our Q&A period, because it's a good question, but not it's best saved for the end. When we can give it some time. Okay, so anything else that you two want to mention about genre or anything like that before we move on?
No, I think we
covered it. So we're then moving into brainstorming the plot. And I want to start this off by saying, there's no right way to brainstorm or think of a new story. And the template offers a suggestion and exercises to help you think of it. But that doesn't mean that it's the only way to do it. And so I want to hear from you folks, how do you come up with a new idea, or how do you take this little kernel of an idea and turn it into a story? What are your first steps?
I start thinking, usually I start with a character and I think of some quirky thing about this character that I think is fun or funny or whatever, and then think of something horrible I could do to them. And then
Posey Mister.
And then I kind of play that game. Like this is a guy that I like, and this is what he wants. I want to keep him from getting that, but do it in a fun way. Maybe hurt someone else in the process, and then allow him to sort of be a hero, while also preventing him from getting the ultimate thing he wants. And I just start kind of playing that game. What are some things that could happen? What are some goals? How can I prevent those goals? How can I ultimately let him get those goals, but have to struggle to get it? And I just start kind of playing that game and making notes, and that It's all kind of fuzzy in the beginning, but I just start gathering ideas like that. And that's where it begins for me usually.
You come up with somebody that you like that's a really cool guy, and then you put him in a tree, and you set that tree on
Tree on
fire.
fire.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
For me, for this book in particular, it came out of an idea from an article I saw online, talking about Chinese spies repatriating Chinese citizens, where they would go and forcibly kidnap Chinese citizens that have defected from China, and they repatriate them to China. They go and just take the whole family back. And
Mm.
they were in the United States doing this. There's cells of Chinese operators that work here. That's what they do all over the world. They go and they find these expats and kidnap them basically and take them back to China. And
Mm.
that's what kind of spurred the initial idea. And then the the first iteration of this idea was basically just that. And then when I started kind of thinking about what I wanted to do as a series, it evolved into a kind of a bigger thing, where I'm doing that. That element is in the book, but it's also going to revolve around rare earth minerals, and that came from an idea of a guy I talked to in Dragon Con, where I was asking about lithium and lithium mines, and all the electric car batteries and all of that stuff. And he said, well, actually, rare earth minerals would be a better plot point for that, because they're more rare and they're more valuable, and the market around that is kind of in kind of a flux right now. And so um, now I'm kind of piecing together those elements to make them work together. But for me, for the story, I come up with the main premise that I want to deal with, and in this case, it's protecting the and in my book, it's North Korea, not China, but in this case, it's protecting that family. And what are the other events that kind of are involved in that, but also what's the bigger picture? What else is going on that we need to play with or that we can play with? And then I kind of piece those things together. As far as characters, I've got a character. He doesn't come from really any inspiration other than I need a cool guy. But I come up with his skill set and all of that, and then I kind of play to those strengths, and figure out situations like Hank said where he can fail and he has the opportunity to fail. Because if your character's not failing, um, in this genre anyway, if your character doesn't fail a lot, then his successes are not, they're nothing, right? It's he success, yay, he succeeds, yay, he wins, and then he never loses, and then his wins mean nothing. But the wins mean a whole lot more when you lose a whole bunch before you get there. It's a try fail cycle. And so then I just come up with elements that um, complement the main idea, but those elements that he can fail at and still succeed in the main idea. So I just start piecing all those things together and kind of seeing where they fit. And a lot of the ideas don't work, but most of them kind of fit into where I need them to be.
Dang, I want to read that book, Josh.
Yeah.
You hurry up. I'll give you a specific for the book I'm writing. I've been thinking about characters and kind of casting out. And my main protagonist is a young guy in his 20s, and he wants to be a mystery author. And he has his grandmother has given him enough money that he can take 2 years to write a book, break into the industry, and get started. And if he doesn't do it within those 2 years, he has to go get a quote real job. So he has a limited amount of time, and he's working on a book, and it's coming along. And his girlfriend owns a mystery bookshop in this little town, and the little town used to be an industrial town, which happened in the South where I live. We had all these little towns that were built up around mills and textile factories and things like that. And then in the early '90s, when NAFTA came along, they all got shipped to Mexico, and so you've got all these little towns that used to be industry towns, but they're not anymore. Well, this one has some hot springs, and it kind of becomes a touristy spot where they've kind of recreated the economy, and so that's where it's set. But he's under the gun to get something done in this 2 years, and then a dead body shows up, and he has this thing that he's working toward. He's got a limited amount of time, and then this mystery kind of plows into his life, and he has to for various reasons he has to get involved trying to solve the murder, and it's his ultimate goal is to break into the industry to become an author, but this thing that has literally landed on his doorstep is preventing him, and he's got to work through this, and ultimately that's going to give him ideas that help him in his day job, so to speak, but he doesn't know that yet. And anyway, so I start thinking in kind of those terms. What's the thing that he wants? Why is he under the gun getting there, and what's going to stop him from doing that? And then ultimately, what can this thing teach him that will help in the future? So I start kind of going through those kind of machinations.
There's a great it's the motto or the way that he writes. Aaron Sorkin is a screenwriter, and mentioned of the Few Good Men. He wrote that on a napkin in a bar, and he's his story and dialogue is absolutely phenomenal. If you're ever going to study dialogue, study Aaron Sorkin. He's amazing at it. But one of the things that he says, whether it comes to scenes or acts or the story itself, is intention and obstacle, and he rams those two things together throughout his screenplay or his drafts. At the end, what is their intention and what is the obstacle, and just completely like always having those two. If you're going to have one, you have to have the other, and regardless of whether it's a small, like he's just trying to go to lunch, or if he's saving a president from being assassinated, whatever it is, there's always got to be those two pairs of things that's what's going to make your story a lot better, is always having that intention and always having the obstacle.
Yeah. And we're going to talk a lot more about that next week when we talk about characters.
Sorry, I jumped the gun.
Yeah, I know. How dare you?
My bad.
For my own brainstorming process, this one was easier for me to a degree because I'm using a character that I introduced in my second book and exploring her backstory, because my book takes place after a 10-year apocalyptic war, and she was there in it. So it's exploring her story when she first shows up in this war. So we know how it's ultimately going to end. Like, we know what the end point is. Now it's just about finding that intention and throwing those obstacles in the way. And I'm really, for this one, I'm taking...
I see what you did there.
Right. I pay attention. I'm taking a lot of inspiration from, there was a Tomb Raider movie made like 6 years ago or something. I can't remember the star of it, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was really just
not the one with Angelina Jolie. It was the other one, right?
No, the other one. Yeah, the more recent one. And Lara Croft, the character, is just put through all of these like just awful things, right? Like, it's not an enjoyable experience for her, and that's kind of the inspiration I'm pulling from. So I'm combining what I know the end goal to be, what I know the character to be, with this sort of inspiration. But at the same time, when brainstorming like a new series idea that I have this very vivid scene in my head that I just can't get out of there, and I've just built this whole world and potential series around that nugget of a scene, that I will eventually get to, I don't know, 2026 or something. So brainstorming, like, the idea can come from anywhere, right? Whether it's a character or an event or a scene or a theme or whatever, a line of dialogue, even, you can work from there. But it's cool.
Ideas are easy. We say that all the time. Ideas are easy. People that get hung up on where do you get your ideas from, that's the wrong question. The ideas are easy.
And we have Alicia here saying that she always has a character to start with, and it's a matter of finding what to do with them. Like Hank said, what can I do to him? So that, I think that is one of the probably most common ways of going about it, is you have this character, like you said, how can I make him hurt, or whatever.
What's the saying that character is plot? I don't think of plot scenarios first necessarily. I think of a character and then what plot can happen to him, and that's a fun way for me.
So if we look at the template, there are a couple of different things that we've thrown in there to help you brainstorm. And the first one is just brainstorming, high level ideas. What do you have? What's going on in your head about this story before you get started? Just jot them down. I just jotted. It's going to be a duology. I know that for sure. It's going to focus on a city caught in the middle of a battle, and specifically, like I mentioned, Tomb Raider style, the survival elements of that apocalyptic scenario. I know I need to introduce some threads to be tied up in the sequel, so it can't be a complete resolution at the end of it. And I know that Nymeer, my protagonist, and Emmanuel, a secondary character, have a romantic relationship. We established this in my other book, so I need to start sprinkling that in there. Those are the only high-level ideas that I went in with. And from there, I started refining a little bit. The external conflict. So I'm not going to read this verbatim. I have posted all of this in the Storycraft Cafe for everyone to just tear apart. No, for everyone to look at and see, how I went about it. And you can go in more depth than this. You can go in less depth than this. I went for this because it's a little easier to read on screen. But the external conflict is, she shows up for this battle between angels and demons, but it doesn't go the way that they thought, and they end up struggling for survival instead, and they just have to get out of the city. Would not be as easy as they'd like to hope. But then focus on her internal conflict. She has this extreme sense of duty. She's very faithful. She's very full of conviction. But this survival element that I'm putting into it, she is going to need to go to extremes and kind of sacrifice parts of her own morality in order to get herself and those she cares about out. And then I put it's going to be a negative arc for sure. It's not the duology. I'm calling it the tragedy of Nymeer. It's not going to be a happy duology.
Can I just say really quickly too that talking about external conflict, I think even a lot of experienced authors kind of get almost confused. They get confused and bogged down and just kind of overwhelmed with their book idea. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had conversations with authors, even authors that I know personally, where I say, what is your book about? And like an hour later, they're still talking about it. And they're trying to tell me everything about it. And when they're pitching a book, they try to say everything about it. And a lot of times you can just whittle that down. It's that elevator pitch thing, right? If you can by yourself sit down and write a sentence about what the book is about, that will go so far for you to actually finish that project, because then you're focusing on that one thing. Now, everything else you can break down into little chunks. Like the internal conflict's completely different from the external conflict. You don't have to think about that. And you don't have to tell anybody about that when you're telling them their story. Like for me, it's protecting this family. That's it. That's the whole thing. And then everything else is just layers on top of that. But as you're going through and you're planning the book, it's kind of like the snowflake method. As you're going through and you're planning the book, you keep that one main idea in mind. And then as you're going through and you see, okay, I need this element here, then you can work on that. And you don't have to have everything kind of lined out. All you need is that main element. Flush that out as much as you can, and then see where you need the rest of the scenes or whatever else you need in there as far as character or story. All that can come after. It can come during the process even. You don't have to have all that stuff narrowed down.
Yeah. Alicia beat me to it. I was going to say Randy Ingermanson with his snowflake method would starts with that. What's that synopsis? And then that helps you to stay focused. That not only helps you when it comes time to pitch the book, but as you're writing, to always have that focus. Am I straying too far away? Am I adding subplots that add nothing to this character's ultimate goal? It helps you stay focused and kind of to reverse engineer that. If you start with the main point, and then that way you never get too far from it.
For sure.
Yeah.
Blackblade said, I always find ideas easy until I need one, and all I have to say to that, Blackblade, is touche.
Man, isn't that the truth? And that's it. that kind of goes along with the big external point is I've got a great idea for this thing, and then trying to figure out what to do for all the supporting elements. I'm like, I don't know what to do here. Where do I put it? And then I even have an idea, and I open up the document, I start writing. I go, I have no idea what I want to say here, and I just look at it, go, what am I doing here?
Yeah,
I'm a failure.
You can put that instead of Master Wordsmith Apprentice, just failure.
Failure, yeah. Massive failure.
Something else I'm going to show here, because also in the template is the major story beats that you can start thinking about. And again, like Josh just said, I don't think that you need to get super granular with them, but having a decent idea of like the trail that you want to walk down, like a little map of the road trip you're going to take, not a bad thing to keep you on track. Just be open to evolution through it, and change in direction, little forks in the road, if I can continue that metaphor. But we included the inciting incident, rising action, which is multiple scenes or chapters, the midpoint, which is a particularly sad or devastating or revelatory moment,
Nice work.
the climax,
Nice work.
and then thank you, and then the resolution. So I'll quickly, just so people see what mine looks like: the inciting incident, the tide of battle turns, and the angels are routed. Rising action, I have a couple bullet points here. Just rising action, you really want to focus on upping the ante, increasing the tension. Like it should be, Josh, you mentioned try fail cycles before, and that's something that I've used in a bunch of blogs. But do you want to give a quick explanation to the folks watching about what that means?
Yeah, try fail cycle is you have elements of your story that you have to accomplish. You need A, B, and C to get to D. And when you go for A, you fail the first time, whatever it is, you fail at getting A, and that sets you back. And then you either have to try to go for A again, or you go for another completely separate thing. And then you go for that separate thing, and you have a fail cycle there. And it doesn't mean that you have to fail fundamentally at what you're doing, but even just it accomplishing it not the way that you thought you were going to, or that the character thought they were going to, that's also considered kind of a fail in the try fail cycle. It's always setting something up and then having it either not work or go a different way, and just putting complications in that. Or if you're uh, uh, rescuing someone from a prison, and the succeed would be getting out of prison and getting a clean getaway. The fail would be getting out of prison and then they're following you. They're chasing you down. That's a fail cycle as well. And so they can kind of stack, and you always want to, it's kind of the intention and obstacle thing, but you want to have those kind of mirroring each other through your manuscript, through the elements, so that you never have just a try, succeed, try, succeed, try, succeed. You want try, fail, or try like quasi succeed and then try fail. You want to litter those through the book, so it continues to push your reader or your character to always be fighting an uphill battle, so to speak, as they're going through the plot elements.
Yeah, you ultimately want your character to grow through that, either to learn something new, to humble themselves in some way, which then brings some sort of personal growth, or it should ultimately bring about some sort of change in your story that moves the narrative forward instead of just beating up on your character. Hopefully, unless you're Doug.
Kind of like I said it. I can't remember, it was last week. Whatever, the last time I was on the show, I mentioned having that kind of motto that the main character is going to have, is like he's got a plan, and then he never has a plan, and that's not really a try fail cycle. But when you get to the end and he actually does have a plan, that changes the paradigm, and it gives that kind of cyclical nature of the, okay, now it's changed, now we can go from there. And you can do that with multiple things through the book to make it a lot more easily read, and give it a lot more depth.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I can't think of a person, fictional or real, who has achieved growth through unmitigated success. Like that is not the catalyst for growth or change. So when you're doing your rising action, think about ways to challenge your character. Think about ways to make them fail. They'll try their best, but they might fall down, but then they get back up. Batman style. Why do we fall down? So we can learn to get back up, kind of thing. Yeah, that's what you want to focus on in the inciting incident. And then I always say, what's nice about that is they start to get this momentum. They start to feel good about themselves. They learned a couple things, and then we smack them in the face with the midpoint, which is up until then the most devastating thing that has happened to them. It is honestly one of my favorite parts of the story to write, because it is like just a grinding halt, like a 180, and it looks different in different genres. In like romance, it might be that breakup that comes before they get back together in the climax. For my last book in my series, it was, the war is going well. Okay, we're gonna try this little distraction thing to get an advantage. Oh, they were expecting that, and now we're scattered. The army's just gone, right? That's the kind of thing that it makes everything almost seem futile up until that point. At least I write a very dark genre, so Hank, your midpoint might look a little less depressing than mine.
Might, you don't know.
Well, and also too, depending on what genre you're writing in, the midpoint might not be the middle of your book.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is that in some books, you're going to have in contrast to Hake's cozy mystery, in my thriller, you're going to have an extended kind of either a battle or a fight or whatever it is at the end that's got to wrap everything up. And depending on what genre you're writing, those sequences may take longer to write than maybe figuring out who the murderer is, right? And so the midpoint of my book is probably going to be around the 40% mark, because of the time and pacing that it's going to take for them to figure out what happened and then solve it and then go and do all the stuff that they need to do. So when you're thinking about your genre, and this is really kind of in the weeds, and I apologize for that, but when you're thinking about the technical standpoint of your structure of your book while you're planning it out, don't get stuck on the terminology of midpoint and all of this, because they can happen at different points. Some inciting incidents where they say, that the general idea is 10 to 15% in your book, you have that inciting incident. Well, sometimes the inciting incident is page 1,
Right.
and then you roll from there. So, they always want to set up the normal and then you change it, where your normal can be the beginning of the book and the inciting incident at the same time sometimes.
Right.
And so just and this comes with experience, and it also comes with kind of learning what your genre does. But you have a book where you have the normal and you have 2 or 3 chapters of him going through his daily life, then the incident happens, you've got to figure that out, you've got to deal with that midpoint, the turn, and all that. A lot of I certainly did when I first started writing. I'd get the inciting incident down, and then I go, holy crap, I still got 25,000 words into the midpoint. I don't know what I'm going to do with any of that. So you just don't get stuck on the midpoint aspect of it. Has to be in the middle of your book. It can start anywhere. The climax can start at like 60%. I mean, this is a horrible example, but like Brandon Sanderson, one of his end climax scenes is like 100,000 words long, right? Like that's enormous, and that's a whole book for some people. That's two books for some people.
That's a very Sanderson thing to do.
100% very Sanderson.
Yeah.
And it's not even specific to that genre. It's specific to him. But there's always differences, and when you look
at to contrast that, like Lord of the Rings, the midpoint for that might be 2/3 of the way through. If you think of like Helm's Deep as kind of the midpoint, all hope is lost. But then it kind of escalates from there into the final battle, and it kind of races downhill. So it kind of takes the midpoint and that resolution and mashes them together, and it's kind of a 100%. Roller coaster down from there. So it gets real fuzzy there. Some of these terms are really academic, and
I would say that in terms of planning your first novel, I would not worry so much about the technical terms of midpoint and turn and all of that. Just write the story out. Once you get the entire thing not written but the idea and all of that, then you can figure out, do you need to shift things around, or do I need to add something here to make this more of a midpoint than it is? Because that a lot of times is easier to see once you have kind of the big general ideas down. You can kind of see what you need to do with it.
Yeah. Just know that you need those emotional points, not necessarily that they're going to fall on a map at a particular place.
For sure.
I wish it was called something other than the midpoint, and I'm sure there are terms out there,
for sure,
like the turning point or whatever. But yeah, we have Ray here saying, thanks for going over the story beats. It made me have an epiphany moment to make my timelines more congruent in pacing. And that's an important part too. So yeah, it doesn't need to be right at the 50%. Mine tends to be, versus yours at the 40%, mine tends to be more at that kind of 66%, like 2/3 of the way through. Right. And then we just barrel towards catastrophe after that. But yeah, it's just that is like one of my favorite moments in writing. And then you go to the climax from there, and then the resolution after. We're writing quite short novels for this challenge. If you're aiming for that 50,000 word novel, there's not a lot of room for like a lot of rising action. For example, you're only going to have, depending on how long your chapters are, 4 or 5 chapters, maybe 6, 7 chapters. Just saw that comment. Binge all the fantasy books.
Yeah, we're not going to discourage you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no,
definitely not. Definitely not.
All right, we're gonna tackle this last part of the template, or step 3, world building, quite quickly, because there is, like brainstorming, there's no right way of doing world building, and for a lot of people, the world, you might not even need to construct much of a world within your story. If you're doing fantasy or sci-fi, you're probably doing a lot of world building, or a lot more compared to someone who's doing like a contemporary romance, or like a small town Christmas romance or something. I saw in the community someone's writing a Hallmark style romance, and I absolutely love that. I'm obsessed with Hallmark Christmas movies, and it's like a weak spot. But you build the village up where it takes place, where the farmer works, and the corporate protagonist has to go there to buy up the land or something. But beyond that, you don't have to do a lot. So
you just wear your Canadianness right on your sleeve, don't you?
Do you know how many Hallmark movies are filmed around me?
What are you talking about?
For you gentlemen, how are you approaching world building for your story?
Well, I alluded to it a little bit earlier. I've got a small town, and in a cozy mystery, you need a small, close community. And I started thinking about why this community exists in the form that it does, and that helped me to kind of build a backstory. And I was familiar with the way a lot of these little towns have evolved, and how they've kind of become the way they are. And I needed reasons for certain things to happen in the book, and I just started thinking of, what could this town represent? Why is it structured the way it is? Why do people that live there, why do they live there? Why do they continue? Why do they interact the way they do? And so I just started thinking of things like that.
And really quickly too, with world building, it's very easy to go overboard in world building. World building is one of those aspects of writing where the majority of world building is just for the author, to be able to understand, especially if you're writing like a fantasy or a science fiction or something that is a completely different system, a completely different world. A lot of that is, you have to kind of understand that as the author writing the story, right? But there's an author, and I don't remember his name, but he's a fantasy author, and he developed a money system that he worked out, like every little bit of the money system, like how much this coin is worth, and if you invest over here, and interest, all this stuff. None of that's in the book. Right. But he needed to know how the money system worked. And so I kind of tackle world building in pieces, specifically for the book I'm working on now. World building for me focuses right now on what is going on in the current realm of rare earth minerals and business and government alliances and that kind of thing. What focuses around that, because that'll color how I present certain things. Do I need to? I mean, I'm going to make up a company, right? I'm not going to use a real company's name, but so I've got to world build the company, but I'm also going to base that in fact on like actual real companies. But also when it comes to like world building settings, I don't think about any of that until I know that I need it. So if I know that I'm going to need a chase through a South American town, then I'll start looking at South American towns and go, does this work? Is this near where I am? If it's not, do I need to change things? One of the greatest things I think that I've heard Mark Greeny say in terms of world building, because his stuff is very realistic. He goes to the places, for the most part. He goes to these places. He looks at them. He walks through them. He knows what they smell like. He knows what the people sound like. He knows the street noises and all of that, so he can really get that accurate. But in Deadeye, he went to the city, the town. I think it was Prague, but I could be wrong. And he had this hotel, and he needed a way to get out on the balcony or a roof or something. And this hotel was not built like that. It would not facilitate what he wanted to do with the story, so he changed it. And there were some comments or reviews that said, oh, this hotel's not like that. And he's like, yeah, that's true, but I needed to do something with it, so I changed it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of tackle it on a need basis in terms of world building in that way. If I need to know the money of a system, then I'll figure that out. But if it doesn't matter to what the story that I'm trying to tell, I don't even think about it. If I need a car chase, then I'll look at the streets and go, does this work here? And if I need to tweak it, I can tweak it. If I need a magic system for something, I'll think about that. But very early in my career, I spent many hours world building. I've got pages and pages and pages of notes on like warships for far future, like space, and like how many rounds did they have and how much crew did they have, and all of this kind of minutia that never made it into the story, but I spent hours and hours and hours researching it and trying to brainstorm this stuff because it was cool, but I didn't need it. So that'd be my best advice that I give on world building is don't over world build. Figure out what your story needs and then build your world around it. And of that world building, be very careful about putting it all in. Typically speaking, you probably can use about 20% of the world building material that you have in your story building notes and all of that, you can put in the book. But if you start putting in everything, all the notes and research and stuff, it's going to kind of take over the story and the readers aren't going to find it interesting. So I just and obviously it's easy for me to say because I've done it for so long, but I found after writing so many books that there's so many things that as a newer author that I thought about that just aren't necessary in terms of writing the story, that I don't spend the energy trying to figure it out anymore. I wait until I need it and then I backtrack and kind of fill it in. And a lot of that stuff, that's why I plot so much, is a lot of that stuff, if I come up with say I need a chase in a town, but I don't know where I'm going to put it. And I get to that point in the outline and I say, okay, I need this deal. And then I can backtrack and figure out, how do I get my people there? Does it work? Can I put it somewhere else? And that way I'm not riding into the headlights, as it were. And then I get to this point, I'm like, oh, this completely doesn't work because this doesn't exist, or this isn't a thing, or whatever.
Yeah. And remember, if you're writing a story set in a real world location, like Mark Graney, for instance, he added balconies or whatever it was to the hotel. That was probably one comment that he got in a review,
right?
Maybe two,
for sure.
You know, and you could argue that if you're going to do something that's going to catch the attention of a lot of people, maybe add an author's note in the beginning of the book. All of these situations are real, but I had to alter, something. You can. A lot of negative feedback will seem worse than it is, and
Right.
that was probably a review or two that got him some comments like that, and he gets hundreds of thousands. Or
now, if you put the Eiffel Tower in Berlin, you're probably going to get a lot of heat for that.
That's going to be that's going to be alternative history then. And that's going to be a whole different,
a whole other thing.
Yeah.
For the folks out there doing like the fantasy genre or anything like that, I just hosted a world building workshop for our premium subscribers last month, and I had a couple golden rules that I wanted to pass on. One of them, kind of echoing your sentiment, Josh, is that the world has to serve the story, right? You can do all the world building you want, but whatever you're including has to be relevant. Because if it's not relevant, you're just throwing it in there, the reader's not going to care. They're going to get bogged down. And if you only have 50,000 words to work with, you're not able to throw in a lot of extra stuff. Now, if you're writing longer stuff, well, some of the things that I love most about reading fantasy and writing fantasy is when in conversations you can make allusions to like a battle that happened 20 years ago or something. And it's just like a little one-off that adds depth to the world, but that's by no means mandatory. And when we're trying to really focus in on outlining a novel and characters in 30 days and then writing 50,000 words in 30 days, we've got to be cognizant of where we're devoting our time. Right. And I could happily world build all day, every day. But I can't if I want to do other things, right? If I want to write the book.
I think one of another interesting aspect about what you're saying is that you allude to a battle, but you don't give any like concrete information about it. There's two things you can do. One, you can have multiple characters remembering it different ways. And so the truth is kind of ambiguous in that aspect, but it also creates a lot of conversation about your books where, I mean, you see people talking about, Game of Thrones lore or Stormlight lore or whatever like that. And if you have these kind of things in your book that are kind of hazy and not really explained and what's going on here, then you generate that kind of conversation where readers are like, I wonder what's happening here, or I wonder what happened here. And then they start theorizing, and that kind of, it builds interest, it builds intrigue in the story. And in essence, it will grow readers. Not necessarily if you're leaving a lot of pertinent information out, but if you got some really cool like world building things that you come up with that don't really fit the story, you can kind of like slide them in just a little bit. You remember the Italian Job, and everybody's like, what's the Italian Job? And you never say what it is, then everybody's like, what's going on?
I think, and also that's a great thing to flesh out more or think more about in revisions, maybe for this challenge specifically. Like come December, once you're done the book, okay, now go add in those really cool things. Do world building now, but do more world building perhaps on the revision side if you're doing that kind of genre.
Sure.
The other golden rule I want to pass on is when you are world building, when you're coming up with these cool details, always remember that your world affects your world, and that if you add a geography element to it, like say mountains, those mountains affect the people that live around it. It affects trade. It affects maybe magic that is pulled from natural resources or something. Like when you're adding things to your world building, you need to be aware of what it does to the rest of your world building in order for it to feel authentic. Now, again, 100%. We're low on time for this challenge, but that's fine. Like do what you can in the time allotted, and then do more once we're done the 50,000 words. That's good.
Yeah.
Anyway, so last thing I wanted to
show story
here
is what matters. All the other stuff, like you're saying, once you have the base story down and you know what your characters are doing, you can fluff out all the rest of the stuff. And a lot of that stuff, like you're saying, it's a lot of times it comes easier in the second round where you know what you need and you can kind of build that stuff around it.
Yeah. I'm going to add just on the screen here a little snippet of, I don't even have a name for the city that this is taking place in yet, but I am basing it off of Toronto because that's an hour away from me. But this is just a little snippet of the world building that I've started from the exercises in the template. I have some geography, I have some population, governance I added, but not governance of what the city was. We're now in apocalypse mode. So what's happening in the city now, what's relevant to the story. It's irrelevant if there was, a dozen city councilors or something and a mayor. They don't exist anymore. What's our situation now? Or if they did exist, what's the ramifications of what they've done? But that's not going to be relevant for me.
Well, and I like that this is what I'm talking about here, is that you have, grid-like streets in your geography, and you can kind of play with that a little bit. You're not
Mhm.
coming up with street names and drawing out maps and all of that, and because that's all the stuff that uh, you don't need for this particular deal with the governments. You have various factions, but you don't go into detail about how many factions, what their names
Mhm.
are, who the leaders are. You don't, because that stuff isn't necessary until you need it. You might not.
Yep.
You may have a scene where you meet one of the factions or you meet a leader, and at that point you can come up with that information. But this various factions element, like that's a description in your book. Various factions control elements of the city, and that's, you leave it at that, and you kind of develop everything else after the fact as you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is like, we're in week 1. Remember, everyone that's watching this, we're just starting out. You don't, even if you want to get more granular than that, and you don't need to, like, you don't need to right now. Save
For
that
sure.
for when you're like, whether or not you're a pantser, save that for some exploratory writing, right? Save that for further on when we develop characters and you realize you need a certain antagonist that is attached to one of these factions or something like that. That comes up later. Just take it. We're just starting. We're just getting started. All right.
And I
Now,
apologize for the fire hose drinking. Sometimes I, I, my ideas and thoughts kind of like spew out, and it's a lot sometimes.
I don't think anyone here is a stranger because both Hank and I tend to ramble whenever we get excited about something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
you're in good company.
sweet.
We did have one question submitted by Ray during this, and I encourage anyone to ask any questions now because we've covered everything in the template. So I guess before the questions, if you are following along with the challenge, your homework, if you want to call it that, and I will be going forward, you have the 3 different steps in week 1 in the template. Cover at least those to whatever degree that you want. And if you were inspired about one of the ways that we brainstorm or how we approach something differently from one another, use that approach when you're writing it, but keep it all in one place so that we can have it all together when we're writing this novel in 60 days. Um, Next week, we are going to be tackling characters, which is going to be an even longer video than today. And we're already normally aim for an hour. We're at an hour 16, probably 2 hours next week, where we're tackling characters. So if you finish your homework for this week, start looking at characters because that's probably the biggest part of your story that we're going to be mapping out beforehand. At least your protagonist
Homework
and
for
other
week
importance.
1: delete the folder. Okay.
All right, and the question that Ray asked before: do y'all have advice for maintaining quality throughout several books, especially regarding structure and especially in a series? It's a heck of a question.
Um, it's actually interesting in terms of quality of story or quality of writing. The structure in my series, the structure of the series of the individual books a lot of times remains the same. Um, because they're in a specific genre, you kind of follow that established genre structure. But in terms of quality throughout several books, um, I think I can't remember if I said this before on one of our recordings or not, but a lot of people will have 5 good ideas and then put one of those ideas in each of those 5 books, and then the quality of the book kind of drops a little bit because you're not dealing with all of those ideas in one book. My suggestion would be to cram all of those good ideas into one book and then come up with 5 more great ideas. Like we've already talked about today, there's so many ideas out there that you can every minute of every day you just get different thoughts. um uh, uh Series is kind of difficult. Like I would never encourage anybody as writing their first book to plan for like a 12-book series because you're going to get burnout. You're either going to get burnout in writing it or you're going to get burnout when nobody reads it. And it's very real. If you're planning a trilogy or like you're doing a duology, those are a little bit easier to kind of plan around and adjust. But maintaining quality is just make sure you're just doing the same amount of work for every book and every chapter. Just make sure that you're putting everything into it that you can, and then the quality will just natively be there. It's it's a really easy thing. Well, especially for this challenge, we're working on one book. Don't think of that as a series. Think about that one book. And if you have other things that you want to do, going forward, kind of keep that in the back of your mind, but just keep all of your energy just focused on that one book that you're writing, because then the quality is going to be there no matter what.
I would start, or I would think in terms of, like we talked about in the beginning, finding a character and knowing what he or she wants. That's kind of this big question that's going to hang over your individual books and your series, and you want to stay consistent across your whole series with your character desires, wants, and what is always standing in their way. And with each book in the series, you will move closer to that ultimate goal, and you will be able to stay closer to that character's character, for lack of a better term. And a lot of times maintaining quality over a series is just being consistent with your characters, and where a character doesn't change drastically from book 1 to book 2. It needs to be a gradual, consistent, believable arc. And a lot
For
of times,
sure.
if you'll keep your character arcs in check and keep them progressing and moving in a believable manner, a lot of times the other stuff will work itself out.
Yeah. As long as you don't have a Boy Scout in the first book and an axe murderer in the second book, and it's the same character,
Exactly.
you shouldn't have a
Exactly.
problem.
Yeah, because that would not be consistent and believable for that character that you established.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. For
Not
myself,
that characters can't change or can't have a bad day or whatever, but ultimately they need to be on the same track.
Yeah.
Yeah, they need to make sense.
Yeah,
Right? They need
make
to.
sense.
They're yeah. For myself, honestly, my guiding light, my yardstick that I measure by is, would I enjoy this story if somebody else wrote it? Right? Like, is this just an enjoyable concept for me? Would I pick this up if I saw it at a bookstore? Then I think that the quality of the story is there, and then I just kind of refine from that. For a series, I echo your sentiment, Josh. My first book was the first in a series of 7 that is yet to be finished. So I've experienced that burnout. If I could go back in
Yeah.
time, I would write a standalone novel before embarking on a
100%.
series.
Yeah.
But if you are writing a series with this challenge, don't let that discourage you. Just be prepared for thinking beyond that, I guess. But focus on this challenge, focus on these 50,000 words. We don't have a long time to get this done. So narrow in on this story, make it the best story that you can. And then if you do need to change it to accommodate a series after, then we do that in December, or we do that in January.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. I don't think we have any other questions. So I want to thank everyone for joining us for this first challenge live stream. I want to thank Hank and Josh for being up on stage here with me and imparting some wisdom. I also want to drop in the chat here the link to the challenge community over at the Storycraft Cafe. If you haven't joined yet, go on, join over there. We have some good conversations going already. It's a place to show off your work if you want to hold yourself accountable or get feedback from fellow participants. But other than that, just take a look at your homework, and we'll see you here, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern, next Thursday, where we're talking about characters. Bye, everyone.
See you.